and welcome to Corporate Culture, your podcast about cooperation, conflict, and culture at work. Today, I speak with Sophie Pénicaud. Sophie is an experienced advisor of humanitarian organizations and currently works for an international NGO in the field of children's rights. And I'm really curious to know more about how it is for her to work in such a challenging, but at the same time, so relevant environment. Sophie, thank you very much for joining this conversation.
Hi, Paul. Thank you so much for inviting me to the podcast. It's really cool to be able to talk to you again. And I'm excited to talk about my experiences, but also to exchange with you. And just to clarify, I'm here on my own, like talking about my own opinions and not representing my organization in any matter. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds good. Perfect. When we talk about your work and your career in general, I think you have a very special career. You work in international organizations mainly. I would be curious to know, why did you choose this career path?
Thank you. So yeah, I've been working in the international cooperation field for almost 10 years. Yeah, it's getting a long time now. So just to explain a little bit my path, so after graduating from high school, I started with a bachelor in history at La Sorbonne in Paris. And initially, I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to cover international news. I was very passionate about many causes, etc. And that's why I wanted to do that. But, in the last year of my studies, last year of my bachelor, I started to think about the international cooperation field. Because, journalism being such a difficult field, especially in France, like difficult to find a job, like difficult to get to the good schools. So yeah, I started to think about that. And before to move to Montreal, because I did not mention that I am French and Canadian. Before moving to Montreal, I spent a year in Birmingham in England, and I taught French in a primary school. So that was my first experience to learn a bit more about English, which is very key to work in the international cooperation field. You need to have a few languages in your pocket. So after this year, I moved to Montreal, and then I really started studying about international cooperation. So I started with a certificate in international cooperation, and then I did a master in international studies at the University of Montreal. And I had a few experiences, including, the experience where we met, the delegation of the United Nations, a simulation of the United Nations where, you present a UN agency and you learn a lot about the international system. So that's where I was convinced that I really want to work in this field. And then after that, I did a few internships at UNESCO in Paris and then at Doctors of the World. And I was really passionate about, working in the humanitarian, not only humanitarian, because, that's two different things, the humanitarian and the development field, not the same type of projects. But I was really convinced I wanted to work in that field. And I went back to Montreal and I started my first real job was actually in the corporate sector. It was with a consultancy firm specialized in evaluation for the international development and humanitarian field. But really private sector. And I spent almost 4 years with them. And then finally, I got back to the NGO, to the nonprofit sector with, my current job with an international organization specialized in children's rights. So that's very like the summary of, my path and, where I started. But my motivations were really, being passionate about causes, wanted to see, it's a bit naive, when I started in this path, but I guess it's the main, it's the same thing for a lot of people starting in this sector is, being like, I want to change the world a little bit. So, but it's really, you need to be passionate to work in this sector for sure.
Yeah. And is that also the motivation that made you choose an international context instead of a national one? Because, for example, humanitarian organizations, they also work on a national level, but you work very internationally. What was the reason to choose that direction?
Because I was really interested in, the dynamics in the world in general, you know, being very aware of geopolitics and stuff like that. But, you know, thinking about it, you know, maybe if I was starting again my path, maybe I would have started with a few experiences locally. And that's something that I will talk about it later on the podcast. But I think it's really important to get some experience locally as well. You can really get some experience of volunteership and stuff like that locally in your own city. You can do stuff with a lot of organizations locally. And it really helps if you want to work in this sector.
And how would you describe the work that you do at the moment? What are your main tasks?
So my specialization is in meal. So it's not about food or nutrition or anything like that. The acronym means monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and learning. So it's really a very technical job. It's a lot about data. I'm not gonna lie. So you have to be very precise. You have to love data. You have to love analyzing data. It's not only like, you know, quantitative data. I don't want to scare anyone. It can be a lot of it about qualitative data as well. So I like to describe, to help people understand what I'm doing, because sometimes it's very, you know, nebulous. It's not easy to understand. I like to describe it as it's a bit like audit, but not on the financial side. So it's really helping, evaluating, and you know, following the projects, but from a qualitative point of view. So basically what I'm doing, because I'm working for a member, like, you know, like most international NGO, my international NGO, they are working as a network. So you have members in each of the, you know, North countries where we get the money mostly. And then we have country offices in all the countries where we have projects. And so we work like a network. So the member for which I work for is in Canada. And so we get the money from the Canadian donor, mostly from the government of Canada. And yes, so my job is really to support our colleagues in the field, in the country offices, to implement the projects, but following the rules of the Canadian donor. So making sure that, you know, we're gonna use their tools, their methodology, their, you know, their expectations, basically, to make sure that we meet, you know, their level, their standards of quality for international development projects. I hope that's clear. Like,
Yeah. No, I have a very clear picture in my head. Yeah. What is the most fun thing in your work, and what is the most challenging for you?
I would say the fun part is definitely the people you met. It's not fun, you know, it's the best part of it. It's you meet so many people along the road. I love that, you know, with my job, I'm working on so many different projects in so many different countries and contexts. You travel a lot. I mean, you know, with the pandemic, it was slowed down a lot. But you know, you meet a lot of people, even virtually, people from everywhere, and in most cases, you share the same values, the same passion about the work. And you realize when you work in this field that, you know, it's not about the money, you know, it's not in the international cooperation field that you're going to make money. So people that you meet in general, they have the same passion for what they're doing. In my case, it's a passion about children's rights, wanting to see things change in various thematics, and also the fact that you can, especially in my role where I'm working on so many different projects, I can work on nutrition projects, education projects, health projects. It's very, there's a lot of variety in what you're going to do, and that's the really fun part about it.
And what is maybe more challenging for you? Is there anything you would say you would maybe warn people who would enter this field that it's also might be challenging aspects of your work?
I would say it's probably the same, actually. You know, jumping from one project to another all the time, being able to switch your mind from one context to another, from one language to another, because, you know, I'm working in French and in English. I'm working for an NGO based in Toronto, so most of my colleagues in Toronto speak English, but because I'm a Francophone as well, I've been put on like a lot of Francophone projects in Western Africa, for example. I'm also working a little bit in Latin America because I'm able to understand and, you know, to communicate very basically in Spanish. So that's the challenge, to be able to switch context, but also to switch, your kind of cultural lens, being able to, okay, I'm going to speak to people based in this country. And so they're living these realities. So maybe I'm going to, you need to adjust all the time. The tone that you use, you need to have a lot of diplomacy in the way you talk. Very specific to my role is that, in some contexts, you're going to lack a lot of data. It's difficult to get to the data, especially, in context of emergencies. It's going to be very difficult to collect data from people because, of course, that's not a priority for them to, respond to survey. So that's difficulty as well, to be able to adjust, your expectations. And based in Canada, you need to be, the kind of buffer between, the donor and, the realities of the field, the realities of your colleagues in the various countries, and making sure that you're able to, protect each perspectives.
Now that you talk about data, I just have this question in my mind. Now with the rise of artificial intelligence, is AI helping you in the humanitarian work, or is it not really a factor for you at the moment?
I feel like right now we are not, or maybe it's just me, but I feel like it's not that easy to integrate AI in my job right now, because there's a lot of human perspective that you cannot really get from AI. Maybe, AI could be more used in terms of designing the tools that we're doing, like that we're using. So for example, I'm going to use a lot of, when I collect quantitative data, for example, we're going to use a lot of surveys. So yes, maybe AI could help us to frame the questions in a more efficient way, or, making sure that there's no repetitions or stuff like that. But even that, it's very difficult because in general, the tools that we're doing, we are trying to make them in a way that we're going to collect very exactly the indicators that we need to have for the donor. So I feel like it would be more work sometimes to put all the information, all the instructions to AI, rather than just doing it by yourself. See what I mean? I feel like, but maybe it's just me, I'm not used to AI yet, and I need to practice a bit more, but I feel like sometimes it's more work to put all the info in the robot rather than doing it yourself when you are used to it. And so for you, it's just quite like a quick work to do. So yeah, and same, when I'm doing, like when I'm collecting more qualitative stuff, it's going to be, for example, interviews or focus group discussions, when you gather people from the same group in a room and you're going to ask questions to the group and they're going to exchange together, etc. I don't feel like AI can really help us with that. Maybe it could help us, with transcriptions, for example. We take notes and, but I don't know. Yeah, I feel like maybe our field is still a bit slow in integrating data in AI. So we'll see in the next year.
Yeah, but also I remember what you said before, that you're mainly focused on qualitative data, right? And it's not some form of data that you can generate out of a computer, but you probably need to have it from the field, right? From the projects, as you say. So I can understand it's different. Yeah.
And something that I would add is also that we are like working on subjects that can be very sensitive as well. And so sometimes you don't want to put that information in AI. It's very confidential data. You want to make sure that you protect the communities as well, that you work with, that you interview. So, when you deal with, I don't know, violence against women or children, or, you're talking about sexual and reproductive health or this kind of stuff, it's very sensitive. So you have to be very careful about using AI assistants. And that's why it's, when it's kept in the good hands, it can be better.
We talked before a bit about different levels. You work very much on international, global level. Other people might work on a more national, local level. It made me think about this metaphor of a bakery, for example. So if I work in a bakery, I have a very good feeling about the impact of my work. So I do the bread and then I sell the bread, and at the end of the morning, ideally all the bread is sold, and I can feel, okay, that was my impact, my work. And I feel when I speak to people like you who work on a very, very high level, international level, it's maybe a bit more complicated to see the impact. And I'm wondering what you think about it. How clearly can you see the impact of what you do?
Yeah. The first thing is, in my job as a meal advisor, I don't speak a lot about impact. I don't really like to talk about impact, but because in meal, talking about impact, it means that you go back to a country like a few years later after your project's closed, and you collect data again, and you see if, the project finished like 2 years ago, was there an impact? And we don't do that because the donor doesn't give us money in general to go back to the field like a few years later to collect data. The evaluations that I'm conducting right now, they are at the end of the project, at project closure. And so this is not impact, it's results. It's like immediate results of the project. So that's the first thing. So yeah, sometimes it can be difficult to see, but I guess for the results part, yes, we see the results because we collect the data. And so it can be very nice to see, yes, I don't know, like, I'm saying just an example like this, but, there was 25% of girls, adolescent girls, getting to secondary school in this area of this country. And 4 years after these education projects, we got to 60% or something like that. This is a very good result. But just to give an example, you see in my job especially, you see the results of what the colleagues in the field are implementing. So that's very nice to see the results. In terms of impact, we still see sometimes very good examples of, but it's more like a mix of a lot of factors. It's not only us. It's always like you have to think about, it's not only the work of your organization, it's in general a mix of the work of various partnerships with organizations, with local organizations as well, with like a lot of work, a lot of advocacy work. I have an example. I think it was last year. We saw the result of a project. It was a project in education and sexual and reproductive health in an African country. And a few years, I think 2 years after the closure of our project, there was a new law in the country forbidding, a practice that wasn't good for a woman's health. So that's a good example of like seeing an impact. It's not only us for sure, it's a mix of different factors again locally, but seeing an impact of as you say in French, like putting a stone to the building. You see what I mean? Mettre une pierre à l'édifice. So it's really great to see this kind of example, and it happens sometimes. So when it happens, like everyone is like, yay, in this country something changed, and maybe we are part of this change. So that's the good part of it.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And you just mentioned mostly the factual side. We talked a bit about impact, but also about just what happens factually. And then there's also this big emotional aspect, I can imagine, right? Like, because you work a lot in conflict areas or in context where things happen that might not be so enjoyable to witness or to see. And I'm wondering how you deal with that. How's that for you emotionally?
That's a very good question. Honestly, I'm always responding that personally, I cannot detach myself from, like, I cannot detach my emotions to it. I think about work. I think about topic we work on all the time at night, sometime. Also, I work from home 100%. So it does not help, to separate, your work from, your mental health at home. I think the key is trying to balance personal and work life. Sometimes I had to take some breaks from social media. I remember, when there was the beginning, when it's not the beginning because it started a long time ago, but in Ukraine, the Ukraine crisis, I remember that I had to cut social media at some point because I was like, I need to protect my mental space, not only because of the Ukraine crisis, but also because seeing people posting about Ukraine all the time, when there was so many other crises in the world that were totally forgotten by the public. And I was like, it's too much for me. Or, even last year, like it's been almost 2 years now with the situation in Gaza. So same, sometimes I need to cut a little bit, like cut my social media to not see all of the pictures, because I'm already dealing with that at work. So I'm like, in my personal time, I need to stop a little bit and to protect my mental space. But it's not easy, and it's a privilege to be able to do that as well, because we're working with colleagues in these contexts, and when they are really in the situation themselves, in the emergency situations themselves. So, but also I feel like it's just accepting the fact that when you're working in this field, it's just normal to feel these emotions, and it's just being human, so you need to accept these emotions, and just, thinking about people, not even just colleagues, but also, of course, all the communities living in these contexts, in these realities. It really helped to humanize the work that we do too. So I feel like it's really important as well to just accept these emotions, and being touched by what you're doing as well.
Would you say that it's normal to allow emotions also at the workplace, in this humanitarian sector, or are people trying to be like, very professional and not talk about this? Or what is your experience?
Well, in my current organization, that's something that's very good. There's a lot of emphasis on mental health for the staff, making sure that we have space to express, our emotions. And at least, in my current team, and my current managers, there's a lot of, it's a priority to make sure that people are feeling safe as well to express their emotions. And, when we have mental health days, for example, which is very good. So when you need to, take a break for that, you can definitely do that. So I feel like in general, there was a lot of evolution in the sector, and not in all organizations. I cannot speak for all the sector. And I guess that, we are also very privileged in Canada in comparison to other countries, but there's a lot of mental health focus in Canada, contrary to other countries. So yeah, I would say that currently I'm very lucky to be working for an organization where we can definitely prioritize our mental health as well.
You mentioned before that you also worked in the corporate world for some time, and I'm wondering if you have some form of comparison when it comes to mental health. Would you say it's harder to cultivate mental health in the humanitarian sector in comparison to the corporate world? Because I know the corporate world also sometimes can be very harsh, but obviously not working on these kind of life and death context normally as you might do in humanitarian sector. So would you say there's some difference from your experience?
I was also working on humanitarian and development evaluation, so I was also working on the same type of topics, but also for sure there was a distance between me and the field, because of course I was not directly in contact with people in these realities, so of course it's easier on that part. But there are different mental health challenges when you work in the corporate field in the humanitarian sector, because of course when it's corporate, of course there's the pressure of getting contracts, of making money, so yeah, it's not the same pressure, it's a pressure of always being on the go, and sometimes I had like 9 projects at the same times, or this type of things. When you work for the non-for-profit sector, it's actually the total contrary. So it's the pressure also to not have enough budgets to implement all the things that you want to implement. So you need to be very careful when you calculate your budgets. But definitely you're closer to the field. So in terms of putting your emotions in the work, that's harder in the non-for-profit sector.
Yeah.
I would say.
When I think about humanitarian work, I often come across this prejudice or this stereotype that often comes up, I think, of us, mostly Western, white, very motivated people trying to help or solve problems in other parts of the world. And I know that you are a person who's very much reflecting on this. So I'm definitely not putting you in this category, but I know that there is this stereotype, right? That many of us in the West think, yeah, we know how to do this, and we will go there and we will help them and we will resolve them, and then everything will be better. And I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on this risk that we might have a very strong conviction of what is right, but it might maybe contradict or not really help the people on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that?
I think the first thing is you need to accept it. You know, it's a fact. It's a fact. It's how, you know, historically the humanitarian sector was created. It was from a Western savior point of view. So this is a fact, you know, and there are still a lot of behaviors from people working in NGOs or not, and actions from NGOs themselves that are definitely part of an imbalance between, you know, what we call the North and what we call the South. Which is like another topic that we could discuss about. But, you know, it's a fact. It really exists. It still exists. The good thing is I feel like in the last, you know, maybe 10, 15 years, there was a lot of progress to talk about topics like localizations. I don't know if you heard about it, which is, you know, making sure that we put, you know, the power in the hands of people living in these countries where we are implementing projects. So in reality, this is not, it's still not like the way we work. It's not true, you know, there's still an imbalance between where are the decisions taken and, you know, where it's coming from, you know, because of course, because, you know, the money is from, you know, mostly developed countries, I would say, which is also, you know, there's a lot of debates as well around terminology, which is good, you know. It's I feel like it's very healthy that right now there's a lot of debates around what words to use to make sure that we try to balance a bit more, you know, the power between and you know, who take the decisions. But yeah, because the money, for example, in my case, the money is from Canada, for sure, you know, the decision making is mostly in the hands of colleagues based in Canada, because we say, you know, how to design, how to frame the projects, etc. So of course we try to discuss a lot with colleagues in the various countries we work with, but it's not that easy, you know. Sometimes it's not that easy to make sure that everyone has a seat at the table, basically. So that's, but at least, you know, that's something, there's a lot of discussions around it. So I feel like in the next few years that will be the main challenge, and, you know, that's the thing that a lot of people say in the sector, that will be the main challenge for the sector, you know, localizations and making sure to balance again. And what's happening right now, you know, in the US with all the cutting of funds for USAID, for example, it forces us as well to rethink the sector and to think about how to be better, you know, how to use the money more efficiently, how to make sure that, you know, we give the power to people who are living in these realities, who know what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm. You know, listening to you, I have this. I mean, obviously, I have the impression that you have a very challenging job, but I also find that having a purpose in your job is not really your problem. I feel that for you, probably the purpose is very clear. I mean, from my impression, it's I see a very clear purpose in what you do. And at the same time, I hear many people around me in all kinds of different contexts, work contexts, that they are very much struggling to find a purpose in their work. And I don't know if you think about purpose a lot. If for you that's a big topic, you think about what is my purpose, and what maybe would be your recommendation to other people who are struggling to find purpose in their work.
There's two parts of the question. I feel like personally, like purpose, it's I feel like, you know, with what we just talked about, you need to rethink about your purpose in this sector all the time, because what is your legitimacy in the sector when you are like a white Canadian French person, you know, in this sector. So you need to think about that a lot. You know, I feel like sometimes I feel about what would I do if I change sector completely? You know, how would I reconvert myself professionally? If, you know, there's no legitimacy for me in this sector anymore. But at the same time, I feel like, again, you know, it's sector where you need to be passionate. I feel like there's probably space for everyone when you have the good, when you are here for the right, you know, reasons and the right with the right values. And yeah, but I would say that in general, you know, for people like struggling to get a purpose in their professional work, it's that you don't need to, like, purpose does not need to be at work only. You see what I mean? Like, it could be, you can always, I don't know, you don't get purpose in your current work. Maybe you can do volunteership. Maybe you can, you know, like go to a local organizations in your city and, you know, propose to distribute food to people in the street or homeless people. Like, there's always, I feel like there's always things that you can do in your life, not only at work, where you can get some purpose, where you can making sure that you're doing something for your community, and does not need to be, you know, the other side of the world. You know, it can be very locally.
Yeah.
And it's always the advice that I give as well, you know, when I talk to students who wants to work in the international cooperation field. I always say that, you know, start locally. And that's something that I would do differently for sure. If I had to start again, I would definitely start with, you know, building my legitimacy, locally, because there are so many things to do. There are so many like amazing local organizations in your own city working for so many different causes. So you need to find a cause that is dear to your heart, and then, you know, just like do a little research, and you're gonna find things to do. There's always a lot of things to do. Or, you know, I don't know, get to a board, try to invest yourself on a board. That there's a lot of things to do.
I think that's very helpful advice. Yeah. And actually, that would also be my last question for people who say, okay, the voluntary thing is the one thing, but I would really like to start a career in the humanitarian sector, have a career like you do, or a similar one. Do you have any good first steps for people who really want to build a professional career in the humanitarian sector?
So the first thing is, as I said, you need to be passionate, because it's not a sector where you're going to make money. So you need to know where you're going. You need to have a clear idea of what to do as well, because right now the sector is difficult. It's difficult to get a job. Even like when I started, it was almost 10 years ago, I had to send so many CVs. I had to apply to so many, like hundreds of applications I did. Even now, you know, when you want to change work in this sector, you have to apply some, like, it's very difficult, especially right now, you know, with all the cuts in so many NGOs, in so many UN agencies. You have to be very, it's a very competitive world. So that's the first thing. And to make sure that your CV is different from the others, you have to specialize as soon as possible. So you have to get some technical expertise. You have to, there's a lot of things, you know, you can specialize in gender equality, in education, in health, in meal, as I'm doing, in logistics. There are a lot of different areas of work in this sector, even in finance or advocacy, communications. But I feel like, you know, if you have a very generalist profile, it's going to be difficult right now. Even when I started, it was difficult, but, you know, you're not going to get a position of, you know, project management like that. You know, you need to specialize. It's easier to get to the sector with a very specific specialization.
Okay.
So that would be my advice. And then, you know, don't be afraid of, you know, starting with a lot of internships. If you are a student, do as much internships as possible. I know it's difficult because sometimes, you know, internships in this sector are still not paid, which is a shame, you know, when we talked about human rights and making sure that, you know, labor rights. So, but yeah, you have to get experience, and it can be volunteership as well. You know, it's not only internships, but it's going to be good on your CV, and you're going to build your legitimacy like that. You know, having all these experiences as much as possible, even if it's not well paid, but then it will be easier to get a job.
Thank you very much, Sophie. I think it was super helpful to many people who are interested in your work, in maybe pursuing a similar career. Thank you so much for your time, and I really wish you all the best for your work, for all your future projects, and keep up the good work.
Thank you so much, Paul, for inviting me. It was a pleasure.